Welcome, everybody. My name is Nazar Bina. I am your host and one of your panelists today. I am the co-founder of Urbina Consulting and Omnichannel X, and I'm here representing both companies. I have with us today some of the brightest lights in the content modeling community. I was very happy to see so many people replying on LinkedIn going, look at this lineup. Very exciting to have everybody here today. I'm going to introduce myself properly last, and I'm going to go in the order that people are appearing on my screen. So before I get into the detailed kind of introductions to everybody, I just wanted to remind everyone that if you are registered for this session, this is just one session of a many. We have, as you may have seen on the website, a whole session series called Designing Content for Headless, Omnichannel, and Personalization. This is the first session, Demystifying Content Models. We have upcoming webinars where we're going to be doing more panel discussions with the same groups later in the year, one in September, one in November. And we have the first piece of on-demand content here. We've got a podcast with Yanko Ivanov of Enterprise Knowledge, where we're talking about AI ontologies and componentized content. So, and we will be adding more items to this session series as you go. So if you register for the whole event up here, you'll get notified for everything in the series for the whole rest of the year. And then everything will eventually become on demand and be a whole library of content modeling goodness. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing there. And I want to give Jeff a chance to introduce himself.
Hi, my name is Jeff Eaton. I'm one of the partners at Autogram. We're a boutique agency that focuses on the intersection of content architecture, production operations, and in particular, component-oriented design systems. We find that a lot of organizations are sort of living in the pain point where trying to figure out some big component design system they've got and their content model, and the two don't necessarily meet in the middle, and that is a big pain point. We do, lots of other kinds of work, but like that's sort of the hub that we orbit around, and it's a lot of fun. We do a lot of content modeling.
Thank you very much, Jeff. So Megan, you're next up.
Great, thanks, Nas. Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Casey. I have a company of my own that is just me called Do Better Content Consulting. I also worked with Christina Halverson and continue to at Brain Traffic for, oh gosh, we've been working together since 2004, I think is when we first had our first project together. So a really long time, been doing content for a long time. When it comes to content modeling, I tend to not be the person who delivers or defines the final thing. I more sort of help think about it from what do I want to see, what do I want users to experience, and then how do I work with developers and other partners to make that happen, and building the content models and the definition of those content models to help do that. So not as smart as Jeff and some of the other people here on actually developing content models. Thanks.
Thank you, Megan. Cruz, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you work with content models.
Hey, everybody. I'm Cruz Saunders with A, which is at simpleA.com. And we've been building enterprise content models with organizations for the last decade or so. And before that, content management systems. And more recently been working on content model tooling for enterprise building, managing enterprise content models, and connecting content models into Figma and other design tools, so that we can essentially get structure to work together across all the different parts of the ecosystem. Content models are for websites, but they're also for every other aspect of an organizational enterprise. And we're going to get into that a lot today. There's so many different expressions of content models. They all need to map together and work together. So we're really interested in those intersections and work a lot with some of the largest organizations in the world on content models and management.
Thank you so much, Cruz. Carrie, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, I am Carrie Hain. I have been working kind of at the intersection of people, process, and technology for most of my career, which I stopped doing math at 20 years. And really, and what that means is just helping people and organizations transform how they think about digital content and experiences. Content modeling is something I learned about around, I'm going to say 2010 in relation to designing a content management system, which at the time was Drupal. And it just really resonated me and eventually resulted in co-writing the book Designing Connected Content with Mike Atherton in 2017. And that book is about planning and modeling digital experiences. I am currently working as a digital strategist at Sanity, a content management product that enables organizations to create, manage, and deliver content to any channel. I have been a consultant where I helped people create content models and use them. I have worked in-house where I was more focused on the implementation side and modeled content more specifically for content management systems. So I've kind of run the gamut now of consulting in-house and product vendors in the content strategy and content management space. So interesting perspectives.
Great stuff. Okay, thank you, everybody. And so last but not least, my name is Nazarbine, as I mentioned. I have been working in what we now call Omnichannel and we now call Headless and decoupled systems for 22 years. I originally started on the vendor side working with authoring tools. I was working in a tiny little niche company who had the vision that everybody on their desktop in a tool that looked like Microsoft Word basically could be authoring well-modeled, structured content that was ready for machine processing, personalization, and output to any channel, which was a very hard sell, I can tell you, 7 years before anyone had seen an iPhone. It's gotten a lot more exciting in the past 20 years. And my role is I do content modeling myself, but I have actually shifted a lot of my focus now to the research part of the content model design. So how we look at customer journeys, how we look at experiences, how we matrix together the content requirements, the user requirements, the user requirements for content, the business requirements, and also the metrics of how are we going to measure whether all this is doing what it should do, which is a really good background and framework I found for designing effective content. And I also wrote the book Content Strategy, Connecting the Dots Between Business, Brand, and Benefits with my co-author, Rahel Ann Bailey, who some of you may know. Okay, so that's all of us. We're very happy to hear from all of you as well. You can kind of enter a question at any time. We have a little bit more that I'm going to show you in a second. I'm about to put into the chat there. You should see a toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom window with the chat option, and you can enter a chat whenever you like. Enter a question in the chat whenever you like. If you can, to help us kind of keep an eye on those separately from regular chat, if you can prefix those with a Q, that would be great. I put that little example in there for you. So I am going to kind of kick us off with a very short, and if anyone has seen my webinars on this topic, I'm nothing if not verbose. So I'm going to keep this to 4 slides of an explanation of what is a content model. So the key concepts we have in a content model is we have a collection of types, and those types are designed. So we're thinking about what we actually need to support our customer journeys. I like to say that you should think about your content as a product, with requirements and iterations and so on. And as you can see, we're taking the kind of content that we deal with every day, and we're giving it specific names. Some of these names are kind of already implicit. They are. Jeff likes to say that your content is already modeled to an extent. In the model, we're actually formalizing those names and being consistent about applying them. So each component that we are giving a name becomes kind of like a little Lego piece that we can use to build together different experiences. And they can have associated guidelines for copy, metadata, structure, and how you process them. But what the model is giving us is consistency. And that consistency in our source information opens up all these possibilities for adaptable, manageable, reusable, automation ready, for personalized and even omnichannel output. So just to give you a very quick visualization of what that kind of looks like at a conceptual level, is we have the structural relationships and roles of various content types that work together to create your content experiences. And I put in there not pages. And this is something, hopefully by the end of this session, will be very clear that content models are not made of page types. They're made of content types. And all the content in there is, as much as possible, described on what it is and how it relates to everything else. So we have, for example, a company who's selling different solutions that have features, and there are people in this system. Some of them, they have different roles. So they have a title. They might give a testimonial. They might also buy a solution, and they might be mentioned in a case study, for example. They might also author a case study. So these are the different types, and they all kind of have these different relationships. You can think about it as interlinked structural content templates or mini templates, depending on how you want to look at it. I want to emphasize, though, that although I'm giving you this kind of high-level, clean introduction, you will have heard and you will continue to hear quite a lot of diversity of language around this stuff. So we're going to say content type, content model pretty consistently in this panel discussion, but even those terms are not used consistently in industry. Some people say object, some people say entity. Different CMS vendors sometimes even try to give these things unique names to set themselves apart, but all that does is add more confusion into the industry. And then there's all the stuff that make a content type, which we have even more names: elements, types, properties, fields, attributes. All of these names are correct. There's not a technically right way. In fact, the panelists on the call today don't all use the same terms when we're talking about them. But we all have the idea that there are the main things that we're working on. There's the smaller bits that make them up, and there are relationships between them. And I wanted to call to attention the idea that we have a principle here. For example, a principle might have could be like a best practice or a tip, and they might be something that we use to make up our case studies. So a case study might have several principles that you derive that you can take away from this case study. So you can make types by Legoing together other types or smaller types. And then there's a question of how metadata comes into this, which we'll discuss during the session. How do you tag these things? But the core idea there is that we have these types, not pages, and then we can process them and send them out to our channels, whether that's personalized, not personalized, one channel, many channels, omni-channel. But there's this separation between content and then output. And I think that's one of the most fundamental things that we want to get right off the bat at the top of this session, that we're making that separation. You want to have the minimum amount of actual source content in your system to create the maximum amount of potential output from that shared source. Okay. So that's our intro there. So now what I'd like to do around, and I'll do in the opposite order, starting with Carrie, talking a little bit about why these models matter. Why is it important to have this model? How does it aid our work? Carrie?
Yeah, so for me, a content model is the documentation of the types of content that an organization has and their relationships. So in my head, it's a conceptual diagram of boxes and arrows, very similar to what you showed. And it's not spreadsheets, it's not fields in a CMS to start with. Those are things that come after. And I think those are some of the things that often get called content models. And they are, but I don't think that's a great place to start. When it's a boxes and arrows diagram, it's like a map of your content. A literal, like, oh, like you showed, like a person works for a company and gives a testimonial, and you can start seeing different ways that people can navigate through your content. And in that sense, it's a content strategy tool that lets you see what your central content types are and opens up new possibilities for content creation, how you organize content, not just a sitemap, which is only one hierarchical way to look at your content. And how do you design it using all those Lego pieces? Lego is an excellent analogy, I think probably all of us use. And so when it's used as a strategic tool, not only does it inform how you work with content, it creates alignment among all the stakeholders and teams within an organization, because it should not be something that one person sits at their desk at and creates it and says, here's our content model and everyone must follow it. I think I often use a tweet from Jeff from many, many years ago. Turns out, content modeling is all the friends we made along the way. And I find that to be true over and over again, as light bulbs come on during the process, and like, oh, it doesn't have to be the way it's always been. And people start getting excited about new ways they can share their information.
Excellent. Thank you, Carrie. Cruz, what's your take?
I love that because the relationships between our content objects are also the relationships between our designers and developers, between our departments, between different parts of the organization that all express knowledge, right? And so our website is an expression of something we are talking about, right? This concept of the domain model at the high level of a content model is what are we talking about, and what are the relationships between all those things we're talking about. And in order to actually map that, we have to talk to the people who those things are talking about. So we're creating connections inside of the organization while we're creating a map of the organization's knowledge and how it expresses itself. So when we talk about expressions, we're talking about the way that, for example, let's say it's a topic on how to resolve a chargeback, really sexy topic like that in a financial services company. That might be really used by lots of different organizations, the customer service folks who look at it on a screen pop, the end customer looking at it on an application, the inside the application, when an error comes up, it has to, that information has to be there, needs to be in documentation. So that content model dealing with that particular topic needs to be able to be contained in a way and express the things that all those different places need to be able to represent. And so somebody has to be responsible for bringing that together. And this is where content designers, content strategists coming in and start to build maps and relationships. So yeah, I definitely agree. There's boxes and arrows. We start to see those boxes and arrows with all the relationships becoming a graph over time, because there's so many different relationships between each type and all of the elements that may be expressed. And those elements might live in other types as well. And so creating essentially a three-dimensional object over time is what we move toward. But we start out with something really, really simple, boxes and arrows, and that might become the spreadsheet that becomes a spec to build, for example, your headless CMS or your website list of elements that your designers can use when they're putting together that design in Figma or whatever it is. All those expressions are all ways content models get used. And so it's exciting because we're bringing people together, we're bringing knowledge together, and we're bringing elements of the stack together when we're working with models.
Awesome. Okay. Megan, what do you feel that's the biggest kind of contribution models
Sure,
are
I was
making
gonna say, you
to our
guys
work?
said all my stuff. No, you know, one of the things that I always say to my clients, because content model, I'm often working with people who are more focused in editorial and nothing about like sort of back end type stuff. So you say content model and they're like, what? So the way that I talk about it typically is that it's a collaboration and conversation and understanding tool between us as, you know, them and sort of the editorial side of things and the more back-end data and storage of the content, so that you can display and distribute content in ways that make sense for your users. So that's kind of the way I describe it to lay people like me. And I agree that it definitely starts, it starts very often with, I'll start with just like a very basic wireframe that I've created in Balsamic, and then try to just sort of break out like this one little piece, like the features list that Naz showed earlier, has a lot of other stuff that happens with it in order to display it in the ways and distribute it in the ways that we want to. And I often will talk about how I don't know, like everybody 2 years ago, I watched the Loki show on Disney Plus, and I kind of think about doing content modeling that way. It's like you start somewhere and then you end up coming at it from all of these different perspectives and parallels and universes. And so it kind of feels like the metaverse sometimes. It can feel very complicated. You can come at it from different angles. But at the end of the day, getting that model figured out is, again, it's how you get that understanding between teams. So that's kind of the key way that I use it and think about it.
Awesome. Oh, I'm leaving myself to last, so let's see if I have anything left to say after Jeff goes.
So you know, there's a couple of things that have come up in everyone's comments that I think are really interesting. You know, the first one, I think, Carrie, your comment was that, you know, it's fundamentally a content model is a tool for alignment. And we talk about alignment because everyone is implicitly doing some work that is content modeling when they think about, well, what are we going to make? What do we need to make a lot of? When we say, oh, you need a product, you need product information about all these products, well, what do we mean when we say product information? That type of work is content modeling, essentially saying, oh, well, it needs a name, it needs a price, it needs a description, it needs key features. Those aren't necessarily inherent in the concept of a product. They're how you communicate about a product. And that's what a model is. And that's one of the reasons why, like, you know, for a long time, I would, you know, say things like, no, pages aren't content types or whatever. And I've sort of become like a structure radical since then. You know, it's like, I've received content models in the form of Photoshop files. Now, that's, in my opinion, a terrible format to communicate the kinds of information that's critical. But because a design team was the first one that came in and really started hammering out these questions and answers about a product, about a site and what was going to be communicated, that was the form that they had captured it in. It took a lot of translation to tease that stuff out, but in designing their visual templates, they had thought through a lot of that stuff. And similarly, like editorial teams, you know, copywriters who never touch a CMS may be getting copy decks, just like here's a Word file that has, you know, a line for each thing you need to write and some notes about how it should work. And you'll fill that out and then we'll put it into the system in some way. That is an expression of the work of content modeling in a lot of ways. But getting everybody on the same page in a team so that when the copywriters get their list of what they need to write and the designers know what we're putting on a page and what's most important, and the CMS developers know, oh, well, what rules need to be in there, everyone actually can consistently answer questions that come up and not have weird collisions and alignment problems that make actually doing stuff with that content that's being produced difficult. So like that alignment process between all of these different ways that people think through and express the the shared understanding of how we talk about things and how we communicate messages to our clients or our visitors, or the residents of our state that are visiting the state website or whatever. That alignment is important, because otherwise, everybody's got this overlap at the middle that's sort of implicitly understood, but there's lots of differences on the edges, and things run smoother when people are on the same page. And I think the idea of maps as like a representation of that is a good analogy, because like even with a map, we think, oh, that's objective and concrete, it's right there. We have concepts like a AAA road map, or a satellite map that shows weather, or a subway map that is a very stylized representation of spaces that is meant to communicate certain ways of getting from place to place. We have like, what are the best sandwich shops in Chicago maps that are just like a stylized cartoon of the city with different kinds of sandwiches. All of those things are a map of Chicago, but they're communicating things that different groups of people care about at a given time. And, it's aligning those things and understanding what special aspects different groups and teams care about. That's where a lot of the fun, complicated stuff lives.
Awesome. Let's see what I can add after that. So I want to kind of focus in on the word model. What is a model? When we create a building or a sculpture or just about anything complex, what we need is a little version of that, which generalizes the key universal aspects of it. Like, so if I had a model of a building, for example, like I wouldn't bother with the color of every carpet or paintings on the wall. I would just have you would get the building, and I would have the concept of the building. We could all stand around it and look at it and kind of examine it, and it serves as something, as everyone has said, to keep us all in line so we can all do our particular bits. I'm going to transition into storytelling here, but this idea of having this generalized little model of the great grand complexity that is our actual content gives us a way to kind of all sign off on a contract. So, okay, we've all looked at the model, we agree we're going to build against this. So then everyone can go away and do their bits in parallel, which is much more efficient than doing it either not synchronized at all or in some sort of series. And it's also a model that we can explain to a computer. So one of our team members these days is our computer systems. So content models are something that we can all understand. You can see the boxes and the lines, but it's something we can also embed in content management systems, in authoring tools, in publishing tools that can then take advantage of what we know intuitively. I always point out to people when I'm doing content modeling training, there's no reason that when I write a shopping list or a parts list or a feature list into Google Docs or Microsoft Word that it becomes a bulleted list. Like we're destroying information all the time by creating stuff that way. I put in 5 things in a feature list, and now they're just a bulleted list, which is so there's no differentiation between the bulleted list of my shopping items or the bulleted list of my feature list. Whereas if I have a model and I say these bullets, each one represents a feature, then the computer goes, okay, I know what a feature is. I know how to display features. I know who needs to approve features. I know the governance rules around delivering features in certain countries. So once the computer understands these rules, we have all these options with a content model, and that's really, really, really powerful to jailbreak our content from the output. So instead of working directly in the finished product, we work in the content, and then we create the finished product. So that's really, really powerful. We've got our first question that's come in, which what is the difference between the system design, which is the output of the business analyst of an IT project, and the content model of the content strategist, and how do they work together? We've got a couple of people who are celebrating that question. I think it's a great one. I think Chris is going to jump out of his seat here. So I'm gonna go first this time because I'm letting everybody else go first. So the system design is a higher level thing that is looking at how the system needs to work. Invariably, that will be at one level of granularity of understanding this system. The content model will actually tell you how the content needs to be shaped and structured in order to be able to support those requirements. I mentioned earlier that I see the content model as the output of a customer experience mapping or journey mapping process, where we're figuring out what are the features and functions that our content needs to be able to have to support the user needs. So for example, separating out the features from the price, from the currency, from the product name, etc. If we want to do these things, this is what the content will have to be capable of doing. And so that's where I see the separation. Cruz, I saw you rubbing your hands very quickly. Do you want to go next?
Jeff and I were both really interested in it. I'm sure that the answers will be complementary. We're really, the stack has many layers. And the deeper you go towards the technology, the more technical the content model how more technically the content model expresses itself. When you go further up the stack, when you go towards the presentation, the design, the content design, and the content strategy that is guiding that design, the content model is being used in a different way, but they have to connect, because essentially all the pieces that the system engineer needs are going to express themselves in some kind of schema, which is essentially a map for how a set of content will be represented within a CMS platform or other technical platform. At the high level, when you're dealing with content, you really are looking more for guidance for designers on what to design, and for writers on what to write, and for strategists on how that content is going to be, used in the market. And so that combination of that, the high level information that is really building structure for strategy, design, and experience, is a set of information about content structure and relationships that then needs to tie down to the technical specification that the system engineer needs. So they work together, they inform each other. It doesn't always happen that strategy happens first. Sometimes you've got the technical stuff, and strategy's got to scratch their heads and go, okay, how do we work with that? And sometimes we get to start in a vacuum, and strategists get to imagine the world that they're creating. And then content designers get to design it, and interface designer, and then it works down towards the technical spec. So either way, those two have to work together, and the content engineering, content strategy, content operations team that gets together, we like to call it a content intelligence team, should work together to get all those parts to map together in a consistent way, so that everybody is building, Chicago, to Jeff's analogy, even though one has got the painted picture of the sandwich shops, and one has got the where the plumbing and the sewage is going to go, right? It's like in the electrical. So I think this was so stimulating that Jeff, it blew Jeff's mind. Carrie was,
Get Jeff away.
yeah. Megan, you were going to blow Jeff's mind, and there it was. Oh, there. Okay.
I'm back. Sorry about that. The natural ebb and flow of Zoom deciding it wants to crash occasionally. So yeah, I think that that distinction between the technical infrastructure that's needed for the system to, for the applications that people interact with to work and run, and the content that they're responsible for storing or transforming or turning into a web page and showing to someone, or sending out as a feed to a vendor so that they can drive a point of sale system or whatever. Like, the information that's being managed is its own thing, and then the system is like another layer. I think one of the, I think, you know, my background actually is, you know, the you know, decades I spent were primarily focused on like CMS infrastructure and development and design. And I sort of slowly worked my way into like deep content architecture because it was where everything went off the rails in actually building systems if the content architecture work hadn't been done well. How you store files is one of those things where I think like it's interesting because it goes all the way to the top and the bottom. Let's say you've got a product and you want pictures of that product to be there. At like the concept of a logical content model that you're talking about with people, product photos is usually perfectly significant, you know, perfectly sufficient to describe what the high level content model needs. Now, when you start getting into more details, you might need to say, oh, well, we need some photographs, and then we need a diagram of the product. And that actually is going to be a vector image because, you know, it needs to go a bunch of places and we'll scale it up and scale down. But then you get to things like the systems that are actually doing the work and running on computers, and they need to care about things like, oh, well, does that live on in a directory on a hard disk attached to the server, or does it live on Amazon S3 storage? The system design also needs to really be concerned about those kinds of things. Is it in files? Is it in database? Which system? Is there an API we need to authenticate against? And the content model very rarely needs to care about any of that stuff. It's the how. It's important because it's got to work at the end of the day, but like they're two very different complementary things. And that's why you can take a content model and implement it in lots of different kinds of systems that work in very different ways. And you may need to make tweaks or adjust it, but like, you know, it's sort of they work together.
Yeah, it's just
So, Chris, I want to
and invisible, but just to make that distinction really quick, there's the visible stuff that the user's seeing and the invisible stuff that the machine is seeing. So are we designing for people, human beings? Are we designing our content model for machines and how they need to work? And the system cares about all that invisible stuff, the metadata, right? And then the humans and the customer experience cares about all the visible things. So
and even like when we talk about metadata, the system needs to know, is that, how do we store the metadata? Is that in an XML file? Is it somewhere else or whatever? You know, it's systems design has to go real deep into some of that stuff.
I want to specifically tap Megan here because, you know, in terms of editorial, you know, the content models can tell you something about what you want to, how you should write, how it should sound, have other kinds of rules that the system people just don't care about.
Yeah, I was going to just give an example that I've been using for a really long time because it helped me understand it in the way that I think about it. And it is not the technically probably even correct thing, but I always, when I'm doing content strategy and content design, I'm thinking about the end experience that we want people to have with our content, whether it's an Instagram post or a web page. So let's take a web page. I've done the work that Naz mentioned about doing the customer journey analysis, figuring out what people need and when, and I'm putting together what I think is what someone might need on a web page. And then I'm deconstructing it a little bit to break it down into, okay, well, the feature list is one part of that, the you know, value proposition, all of those different pieces. And I'm kind of taking it that far. I may be able to get you to the point where I know I want to have an image or those kinds of things, and then working with technical folks to sort of, I don't really care necessarily how it's built on the back end and where the information comes from, as long as we can figure out what is a good way, one, for it to show up the way I want it to the people who need the information, but then also the people who are entering the content, you know, can enter it in a way that makes sense. So building in some of that stuff, like you were just saying, Naz, about guidance, about writing a feature list, which may or may not live within a CMS, but it's things that we want to consider as we're modeling our content. So I kind of think about it almost like there's that trend of like deconstructed food for a while, where it was like lasagna, deconstructed lasagna. Well, in order to make deconstructed lasagna, I need to know what lasagna is, and then I can break it up into the different pieces that are constructed. And that still makes sense to me, even though it's like very, you know, whatever the word might be, pedantic, but it still makes sense to me from a content model perspective.
Absolutely. I think we have to keep in mind that the content model is this link between machines, but it can carry a lot of the human stuff, like tips and writing guidelines. You know, what the system will tell you, this has to be 160 characters. Doesn't tell you how to write it. I've got another question that got a +1 on it about object-oriented UX. I thought, Carrie, that smells like something that I should put shoe on.
Yes, I've started. It's been a while, but Sophia Prater and the founder of that philosophy and I have a podcast several years ago about the relationship. So they are similar, but not the same. To me, the object-oriented UX is still about how things are presented on a screen. And the content model doesn't care how things are presented. So in my mind, in an ideal world, you have your model and you have all your attributes, all your Lego bricks, and then and they're objects of some sort, and then you can configure them in different ways on in any presentation. So the OOUX method would use the content model instead of starting from scratch every time, or starting from how do we want to present this, and you could work backwards, but it's more ideal to work the other way. It's similar. It's also similar to atomic design, Brad Frost's framework. I've encountered both of these with customers who are following these different methodologies for design. So it's a really great way to know they're already thinking about components, but it's not a one-to-one relationship. So I think we just have to keep that in mind, that it's all useful and it's a similar mindset, but not the same thing.
I can give a really simple example of that as well. I had a major banking client who they had like loans and savings accounts, they different financial products. And each one had a headline, short description, and like its default image. And what would happen is if you're looking at a student loan, they want to sell you a student savings account, and so on and so on. It's the relationship. So there's like 3 calls to action at the bottom of every product to take you to other products. And what they were doing is they were hand coding those call to actions on that page. So if you wanted to point to the savings account 20 times or 100 times around the site, 100 times you rewrote student savings account, blah, blah, blah. And so we went in and we modeled the products, and we modeled the idea of a call to action that could be a pointer to another product. So it would automatically pull in everything that it said from on that product to be a little call to action box. So you have product living in 2 different places then. You have like the UX of product when you're looking at a product, and then you have the UX of a product when it's a little related box, like it's an atom attached to a larger molecule, as it were. I hate that terminology, but when it's attached to, when it's a little call to action on another product. So I think that they're related, but it's not that a call to action is always a product. That call to action is a design object, but it can point at many things, and it will be populated from possibly different content types that are in your model.
Yeah, this is a good overlap with design systems, and probably a good chance to go into that as well. The objects in a design system, the objects in a content system are both separate things. They need to work together. That's why, in fact, we built this thing called real content in order to get content objects from a headless CMS into Figma, so that you can have your design objects and then your content objects and drag and drop both of them. So people can, for example, take those offers that you're talking about, Naz, and they can create lots of different multi-channel variants with the same objects. So there's an object-oriented, UX piece. There's an object-oriented design component that is the offer box, offer promo pop-up or whatever. And then there's the title, headline, and other pieces from the offer content type that they're able to drag and drop. And those can get wired in directly to the CMS, which allows that content to be updated in the prototype, creating a simulation environment for Omnichannel. So this thing about content getting together more and more with design at an object level, the OOUX is already, they were thinking about that. Sophia was thinking about that years before this whole composable world that we're moving into, and it's really becoming more relevant now.
I think one of the interesting things is that for a long time, the idea of, moving towards a more decoupled approach to, design is this thing that we do, and then content is this thing that we do, and we save everybody hassles by teasing them apart. But, like to your comment, Cruz, the connection to component-oriented design systems as like a body of practice in the design community has really, I think, taught us how difficult it is to pretend they are not connected to each other. I think the analogy I like to use is sort of like the distinction between the script for a film and the final actual shot film. The tools and the practices of like lighting and cinematography and stuff like that are very different from the tools of screenwriting and hammering out good dialogue and stuff like that. But they have to work together effectively. They're sort of two languages that are combined to express sort of a unified vision, and they can fight with each other. Like, I think a great example I saw was the movie Transformers, which is not what you would expect, but in the script, Megan Fox's character is essentially a hyper-competent auto mechanic who saves the day several dozen times and is the only one who knows what's going on. And in the shot version of the film, she's visually presented as eye candy. Those two things are deeply in conflict with each other. The character as written is not the character as shot, and there's a weird dissonance there. And like when we build systems of communication for clients and customers and stuff like that, they are different practices that need different skills, and sometimes something's adapted into multiple different forms. But understanding that they need to work together and be communicating the same language, and they need to be able to align to do a unified form of communication, that's important. And that's why organizational alignment is a really important part of it, in addition to just technical alignment.
So I want to come in with our most popular question here in the chat, which is when pitching content modeling to senior management, what would you say an organization is going to miss out on by not modeling their content? So I'm going to jump in there first. My kind of favorite thing is simply efficiency and consistency. Like you cannot handle a large, complex, even single channel like website efficiently without modeling content, without having a way to kind of define things and make sure that they're created effectively. And if you're going to have consistency within that website, and definitely if you're going to have consistency across multiple channels, and who doesn't have more than one channel these days, then you're going to have to model content. So those are the two big ones that are top of my list. Carrie, can we?
Yeah.
Balance
Yeah. I was actually just thinking, you're missing out on meeting your audience where they are. So I think it's just another way of saying what you said, Naz, is so the content model informs all your content. It's not just for your website. It's not just for an app. It's not just for whatever else you're doing these days. It is for your content. Your organization has content across all your departments, all your channels, all your audiences. And so you should be able to create it once and publish just about everywhere. there's always exceptions, but yeah, so we can't keep creating all of that from scratch. Like even with AI content generation, which we all know is only limited, right? It's you have to think about what people need, and that content model helps do that. You can't start from scratch every time. And you run that consistency. The lack of consistency leads to risk, that you're going to have the wrong information in a place, and someone's going to find that information, and now you're getting sued, or you're giving away products or vacations or whatever you're selling instead of getting money from them, because, so there's just so much risk associated with the inconsistency, and not to mention how people feel about you. We've all encountered that disconnected experience where nobody, someone sees an ad on Hulu, they're watching Hulu, they see an ad, they go to their phone. They might be walking down the street tomorrow and see a store that has a product. Like, we don't go from one thing. We cannot predict the journey of our customers, our audience. So the content model allows you to meet them wherever they are, because you've thought about your content first and what they need. So I don't have it. It's still a hard sell, because you're kind of selling savings rather than revenue, although it ultimately does lead to revenue. There's not a lot, as far as I know, there's not a lot of data that directly ties content modeling to increase revenue. If there is, I would love to know about it.
We have some studies actually where we can show that by being able to distribute content on the right number of channels consistently, and as you say, meet the customer where they are, that we drove some of the most successful campaigns in brand history. Just being, because you couldn't do it otherwise.
Right.
So like, I like to tell managers, you're paying people, sometimes very high value people, to run around doing like file administration, like copying and pasting. It's ridiculous. And Megan, I'm sure you've got a story about messaging going off whack.
Oh, for sure. And I just pulled up this document I wrote for a client that was trying to get some money for content modeling. It was like all the stuff that I have in here about like why it's important, and what are the benefits, flexible and adaptable design and delivery of content, which helps you meet people where they're at in the places they are, single source of truth, so that you're not updating feature lists in 15 different places and 15 different brochures or whatever, because the content model can feed your whatever system you're using to do print on demand brochures and those kinds of things. And predictable, more usable patterns and consistency for the people who need your content were just a couple of the things. I also talk a lot about the fact that the people who are creating that content within wherever you're storing it are users of your content as well. So creating efficiencies and making them feel good about their work. I think that's one way I've been able to like get other people involved. Like, what if you didn't have to worry about how it looked? All you had to worry about is that it's right. And then it would magically make it look the way it's supposed to look for whatever you're creating, for the various ways you need it to create. So there's lots of different ways. I think, more often than not, you have to be able to tie some numbers to it. So like Carrie said, a lot of it is savings, but it also, sometimes I'll flip that on its side and say opportunities. So what if Carrie wasn't spending 20 hours of every week copying and pasting across every single place we have this information? What could Carrie do instead? And sometimes that helps. So
reinvesting those hours.
Yeah.
And I joke that my first half of my career was paid for in localization and translation savings. Like, if you properly structure this stuff and can just send just the bits that have changed, and get with context saying this is a feature, translate it, please. It's millions to the local thing. We've only got 4 minutes left. Questions started flying in the second half. I want to point out that a few of these
for the next one, there's some really good juicy questions in there.
Exactly. So I wanted to remind people, this is demystifying. So this was, I know that some of you are like chomping on the bit to get into the whole, the enterprise complexity of this, but we wanted to provide people a whole learning journey. So this is demystifying. We wanted to stay introductory, kind of get around some of the confusion around models, because there's lots. And we're going to be going on to applying content models, where we're going to get more case studies, more concrete examples, and more of that kind of down in the weeds stuff. And then scaling and maintaining your models, which will be our last session of this series. So we thought we can't tackle modeling properly in a 1 hour session. So we have 3 hours of panel discussion across this year. So I'm very excited. We only got 3 minutes. So do you want to do a quick round to see if there's any closing words, tips, resources people want to point to? Otherwise, do get in touch with us via the, you can reply to the emails you've been getting, or there's our emails also on omnichannelx.com. Get in touch with us, send us your questions for the next sessions, have a look at those, and we'll keep track of those for the upcoming sessions. Any last tips or anywhere that people you want to send people?
Yeah. Hey, I see one of the questions in here is about favorite resources for tackling complex enterprise content models. And there's a bunch of resources that people have filled in there. The one piece of advice that I would give people is start small. Don't try to do the whole enterprise at once. Pick one area that you have allies in, that you can control, practice there, see what you come up against. This is how the enterprises who have actually tackled this problem, that's how they start. Yes. I've not heard of anyone who was successful in an enterprise level not starting small.
Yep. Every enterprise-wide engagement starts with a single application with provable before and after of some kind, because you need to be able to show the journey between what you're doing before you clean up the mess and map it all and get it in wired, and then after with your whole content supply chain, customer experience, and your relationships internally.
Yeah,
or
and then you have
successful project.
Yeah. I would say to try to break it. Like, don't,
Test it.
Really stress test it and try to break it so that you can apply what you learn through breaking it to
your content as a product.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if I were to wrap, I think my final thought would be that nobody cares about structured content like we do. It's what we do a lot, but nobody inherently cares about that as a goal. We hear about things like, consistency and efficiency and content reuse and longevity over time. So the stuff doesn't have to be remade, and, making sure things are valid and aren't, incorrect when lots of people make them. Those are all different kinds of things you can use structure and systems to support. And speaking to those fundamental needs and pain points is almost always a more effective way to get buy-in than talking about the abstract benefits of structured content modeling as a practice. It's a way we get those kinds of things and solve those problems, not the goal we're working towards.
Right. So thank you, everybody, for those wise words. We're at the hour, so I'm going to save my stuff for next time. Appreciate it so much. Yes, the recording will be available. All this will become on-demand content, and we will be chopping it up for social media as well. Got to reuse that stuff. Thank you all so much, Megan, Cruz, Jeff, Carrie. We'll see you next time. And see everybody else. Tell your friends.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right. Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.